Darius Carter, a 35-year-old mechanic, struggled to pay for his diabetic daughter's treatment on his meager salary. When he bought a completely rusted-out 1948 Harley-Davidson for just $50, everyone laughed at him and called him crazy. But when he opened the motorcycle's gas tank, his life changed forever. What he found inside was worth millions of dollars. The August sun in Meridian, Mississippi beat down like a hot hammer on the cracked asphalt of Elm Street. Darius Carter wiped the sweat from his brow with the sleeve of his already soaked shirt, leaving a dark smear of grease on the faded fabric. At 35, D carried more weight on his shoulders than a man his age should. His calloused hands trembled slightly, not from exhaustion but from something deeper, something Afghanistan had left behind like a permanent shadow. Ray's auto repair shop seemed to shrink with each passing day. The peeling walls echoed with the clang of wrenches and the occasional hiss of the air compressor, but also with the silent weight of accumulating bills. D adjusted his position under the hood of a 2003 Chevy Silverado, feeling the familiar tension in his neck, the ache that never completely left him since an IED had flipped his Humvee upside down in Kandahar. "D, phone," Ray shouted from across the shop, his rough voice cutting through the hot air. "It's the hospital again." D's stomach dropped. Sarah. He wiped his hands on a dirty rag and walked to the phone on the wall, his footsteps echoing heavily on the oily concrete. The hospital secretary spoke with that cold efficiency he'd grown to hate. "Mr. Carter, we need to discuss Sarah's payment plan. The bill is now over $8,400 and—" D closed his eyes, seeing his 16-year-old daughter's face again from that morning. Sarah trying to smile while checking her glucose levels, pretending she didn't know he'd sold their television to buy test strips, pretending she didn't hear the calls from the hospital, pretending she believed him when he said everything would be okay. "I understand," D muttered into the phone. I'll figure something out." Another empty promise. Another necessary lie. Ray, a bald 60-year-old man with arms like oak trunks, appeared beside him with a worried expression. "Son, you all right?" D nodded, but his hands were still shaking. "I just need some more overtime, Ray, if you have any." "D, you're already pulling 12-hour days. Your body's gonna break down before it's time." Ray placed a heavy hand on D's shoulder. "Look, I know things are tough with Sarah and all. If you need an advance—" "No." The word came out harsher than D intended. He softened his tone. "Thanks, Ray, but I'll handle it." That afternoon, while D was changing the oil on a Ford Focus, his phone buzzed. A text message from Sarah. "Dad, the insulin pump is making that weird noise again. Don't worry, I'm okay. Love you." D clenched his fists, feeling the grease harden under his nails. "Don't worry." As if that were possible. Sarah's insulin pump had cost $6,000 used, and now it was failing. A new one would cost $8,000, not including the monthly supplies. Numbers that danced in his head like ghosts, ever present, always impossible. It was Thursday when Jake, the other mechanic in the shop, walked in, waving a newspaper. "Hey, D, check this out. Abandoned property auction on Saturday. Says here they got some interesting stuff." D barely glanced at it. Auctions were for people with money to spare, not for someone counting pennies to buy milk. But Jake insisted, pointing to a list at the bottom of the page. "Man, there's a 1948 Harley-Davidson here. Starting bid $50. $50. It's got to be completely shot, but still, $50. D had exactly $73 in his wallet, money that was supposed to last him until his next paycheck the following Friday. But something about the name Harley-Davidson 1948 made his heart quicken. Since he was a boy, D had dreamed of classic motorcycles. In his youth, before the army, before Sarah, before the bills, he'd spend hours in used bookstores looking at magazines of restored Harleys, imagining himself riding the Mississippi highways, the wind washing his worries away. "It's stupid," he muttered to himself, but he couldn't get the idea out of his head. That night, D sat at the kitchen table of his rented house, a modest wood frame house that creaked with every step. The power bill lay open in front of him, $127 overdue. Beside it, Sarah's latest prescription receipt, $340 he didn't have, and on the open newspaper, circled in blue pen, the ad for the Harley. Sarah appeared in the kitchen, her steps slower than usual. She was too thin, her eyes large in a face that always looked tired. But when she smiled, D saw the 6-year-old girl who used to run through the house, shouting she'd be the first diabetic astronaut at NASA. "Dad, are you okay?" She sat down next to him, noticing the scattered papers. "I'm fine, Princess, just organizing some things." Dee quickly folded the power bill. "How are you feeling?" "I'm okay." Sarah took his hand, and Dee felt how cold it was. "Dad, I know things are hard. I don't want you to worry so much about me." Dee turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers. "Sarah, you're my everything. Everything. And I'm going to figure things out, I promise." Another promise. Another desperate hope. After Sarah went to sleep, Dee stayed up late, staring out the kitchen window at the garage out back. It was small. It barely fit his 2008 Dodge Ram that spewed black smoke, but there was enough room for a workbench, enough room for a project. On Friday morning, Dee drove to the auction site with $50 counted 3 times in his pocket. The warehouse on the industrial side of Meridian was buzzing with activity. Cars, furniture, appliances, all of it spread out like the remnants of interrupted lives. He found the vehicle section in the back, where half a dozen rusted-out cars and 2 motorcycles awaited their fates. The Harley was worse than he had imagined. Dee stood before it, feeling a mix of disappointment and fascination. The paint was peeled down to bare metal in many places, leaving orange patches of rust that looked like scars. The gas tank was dented, the tires completely bald and cracked. The engine was caked in hardened grease and decades of grime. Pieces of duct tape and wire held parts together that should have been welded. "That thing's a waste of time," a middle-aged man next to him said, shaking his head. It'd cost more to restore than it's worth. Dee didn't answer. He walked around the motorcycle, lightly touching the cold metal. Beneath all that rust and neglect, he could see the bones of something beautiful. The classic curve of the tank, even dented. The elegant lines of the frame, even bent. And something more. A strange feeling as if the machine were waiting. The auctioneer, a heavy-set man in red suspenders, started to bellow, "Who'll give me $50 for this 1948 Harley-Davidson Panhead? 50 to start." Silence. A few low chuckles. "Anyone? 40? 30? Dee raised his hand, feeling like he was jumping off a cliff. $50. Sold to the gentleman in the blue shirt. Done. He'd done it. $50 he didn't have, spent on a motorcycle that probably wasn't even worth that in scrap. Jake was going to laugh at him. Ray was going to shake his head. Sarah was going to ask why he hadn't used the money for something useful. But as Dee signed the paperwork and arranged for a borrowed trailer, something burned in his chest. Not regret. Hope. For the first time in months, he had a project. A purpose beyond simply surviving from paycheck to paycheck. On Saturday afternoon, with the help of 2 neighbors and a makeshift ramp, Dee managed to get the Harley into the garage behind his house. The motorcycle looked even more pathetic under the harsh light of the fluorescent bulb, but Dee didn't care. He had cleared the workbench, organized his tools, and even bought a used restoration manual for $15. He started slowly, documenting every part with photos on his phone. He removed the cracked saddle, disconnected cables that looked like tangled spaghetti, drained fluids that had turned into black sludge. Every removed bolt was a small victory, every cleaned part a step toward, what? He didn't know exactly. Maybe a running motorcycle he could sell for a few thousand, maybe just the satisfaction of fixing something broken. It was on Monday night, after 3 hours of working in the garage following a full day at the shop, that Dee noticed something strange about the gas tank. He was trying to remove it from the frame when he felt the uneven weight. He shook the tank slightly. It wasn't the slosh of old fuel. It was different, heavier, more solid, as if there was something inside that shouldn't be there. Dee turned the tank in the light, examining every inch of the metal surface. That's when he saw it. A weld line along the base, poorly done and obviously added after the original manufacturing. The weld was different from the rest of the work on the motorcycle. Coarser, more hurried, as if someone had cut the tank open and sealed it back up. His heart started to beat faster. Dee grabbed a flashlight and examined the weld more closely. It definitely wasn't original. Someone had modified this tank, and recently enough that the weld was still relatively bright beneath the surface rust. Why would someone seal a gas tank that way? And why was the weight so strange? Dee looked at his tools on the workbench. He had a small blowtorch, enough to cut the weld. But what if he ruined something important? What if there was still old fuel inside? What if there was something valuable? The idea hit him like a lightning bolt. People hid things in strange places during the war. He'd heard stories of soldiers hiding money, jewelry, important documents. And this was a 1948 Harley, right in the post-war era. Dee looked through the small window in the garage door to the house, where Sarah was doing homework at the kitchen table. The kitchen light made her look even more fragile. more in need of care he couldn't afford. He fired up the blowtorch. The metal cut more easily than he expected. The makeshift weld separated with little resistance, releasing a strange smell, not gasoline but something chemical and preservative. He carefully removed the welded section, creating an opening in the tank. There was no fuel inside, no rust, no oil. The interior was completely dry and lined with a waxed cloth that looked professional, as if someone had prepared this space specifically to preserve something important. Dee shined the flashlight into the opening and gasped. Metal tubes, 20 or more, were carefully arranged inside the tank. Each was the size of a paper roll, sealed at the ends with wax. Beside them, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather pouch that looked heavy and substantial. With hands shaking more than ever, Dee removed the pouch first. It was old, but well preserved, with a brass clasp that still worked. When he opened it, he almost dropped the flashlight. Gold coins, dozens of them, each the size of a quarter but heavy and brilliant even in the dim garage light. Dee picked one up and examined it under the flashlight. United States of America, $20, 1920, $20 gold pieces. And there were, he quickly counted, at least 40 or 50 coins, maybe more. Dee sat down hard on the concrete garage floor, the pouch open in his lap, gold coins spilling out like little suns. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it echoing off the garage walls. This wasn't a gas tank. It was a safe, and by some impossible miracle it now belonged to him. Dee was frozen on the garage floor for several long minutes, the gold coins scattered around him like small, fallen suns. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it echoing in his ears. With hands shaking uncontrollably, he started to remove the metal tubes from the tank, one by one. Each tube was heavy and carefully sealed at the ends with military wax. Dee broke the seal on the first one with a screwdriver, releasing a strong smell of preservative chemicals. Inside, rolled precisely, were black and white photographs and what looked like official documents, yellowed with age. The photographs showed black men in military uniforms Dee recognized immediately, Tuskegee Airmen pilots. But there was something different about these photos. They weren't posing for official portraits. They were working, laughing, arms slung around each other like brothers. Personal, intimate photos, taken by someone who knew them well. Dee opened the second tube. More photographs, but these were of a gleaming, immaculate Harley-Davidson, parked beside military hangars. A black man in uniform was leaning against the motorcycle, smiling for the camera. Even in the faded photo, Dee could see the pride in his eyes. The third tube contained maps, not of roads, but flight maps, air routes marked with handwritten notes. The fourth held military documents, certificates of commendation, mission logs, all signed with the same name, Captain Robert "Rebel" Hayes. Dee sat on the cold concrete, surrounded by decades of scattered history. His hands were still trembling when he picked up the leather pouch again. This time he examined it more carefully. Inside, among the gold coins, and he counted 847 of them, there were also folded papers, gold certificates, some dated 1933, and something that made his blood run cold, a military life insurance policy for $50,000, never claimed. But it was the last item at the bottom of the pouch that broke Dee's heart, a small, black, leather-bound diary with the initials RH embossed on the cover. Inside, the first page was written in elegant handwriting. This diary belongs to Captain Robert Hayes, 332nd Fighter Group, Tuskegee Airmen. If anything should happen to me, let someone know that we lived, fought, and died as free men. December 1948. Dee turned the pages with reverence. The entries were sporadic, but powerful. January 15th, 1949. The white folks in Montgomery are talking trouble for veterans like us. I hear the whispers in town. Maybe it's time to get the Harley ready for a long trip. The gold is safe. Little Bobby will never go hungry if something happens to me. February 3rd, 1949. Dreamed of the sky again. Not of war, but of freedom. White clouds, clean air, no man telling me where I can and can't fly. Maybe one day Bobby can feel that too. March 12th, 1949. If anyone finds this, know that I chose to disappear, not out of cowardice, but out of love. Little Bobby deserves a better future than the shadows that follow me. The gold is for him. The history is for everyone. The last entry was dated March 20th, 1949. After that, blank pages. Dee closed the diary and leaned back against the garage wall, fighting back the tears that burned his eyes. Captain Robert Hayes had vanished in 1949. leaving behind a fortune hidden in the tank of his Harley, and a story the world never knew. Little Bobby. Who was Little Bobby? Dee looked again at the photographs scattered on the floor. One of them showed Captain Hayes next to a black child, a little boy with a wide smile. On the back, written in the same elegant handwriting, "Bobby, my pride and joy, 1948. Dee's chest tightened. Captain Hayes had hidden a fortune for a child who probably thought his hero had simply abandoned him. A child who grew up never knowing there was a treasure waiting for him. Never knowing that someone loved him enough to risk everything for his future. Dee pulled out his phone and checked the time. 11:47 p.m. Sarah would have been asleep long ago. He started to carefully place the items back in the tank, but stopped. No, this couldn't go back into the dark. Captain Robert "Rebel" Hayes deserved more than that. His story deserved to be told. And little Bobby, who must now be around 80 years old if he was still alive, deserved to know the truth. Dee carried the entire contents of the tank into the house, spreading everything carefully across the kitchen table. Under the yellow lamplight, the gold coins shone like promises. The documents whispered stories of courage and sacrifice. The photographs showed the faces of men who had served their country with honor, only to be forgotten by history. 847 $20 gold coins. Dee did the math in his head. Even at the basic value of gold, that represented hundreds of thousands of dollars. Maybe more than $1 million, depending on the rarity of the coins and their historical value. Enough money to pay for Sarah's treatment for the rest of her life. Enough money to buy a real house, a new car, a new life. Enough money to do everything he had ever dreamed of giving his daughter. But as Dee looked at Captain Hayes' open diary, a heavy weight settled in his chest. This wasn't just his treasure to take. It was a hero's legacy. It was the story of a man who had served his country in the sky and then disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind only whispers and a child who never knew what happened to his protector. Dee touched one of the photographs, Captain Hayes smiling beside his gleaming Harley. Even through the decades and faded paper, the pride in his eyes was unmistakable. This was a man who believed in something bigger than himself, and now, by some miracle of fate, the responsibility of honoring that belief had fallen into the calloused hands of a veteran mechanic struggling to get by in Meridian, Mississippi. Dee closed his eyes, and, for the first time since coming back from Afghanistan, he prayed, not for money or a miraculous cure, but for wisdom, for the strength to do the right thing even if he didn't yet know what that meant. When he opened his eyes, Sarah was standing in the kitchen doorway, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Dad, why are you up? And what is all this?" Dee looked at his daughter, thin, fragile, but with the bright, curious eyes that always reminded him what was worth fighting for. Then he looked at the table covered in gold and history. "Princess," he said softly, "I think we found something very important, something that's going to change everything." The next 3 days passed in a blur for Dee. He could barely concentrate on his work at Ray's shop, his thoughts constantly returning to the treasure hidden in his house. Every night after Sarah went to sleep, he would sit at the kitchen table, studying Captain Hayes' documents like an obsessed detective. Slowly, a story began to take shape. Robert Hayes had been born in Detroit in 1919, the son of auto workers. He joined the Army Air Corps in 1941 and became one of the original Tuskegee pilots. The documents showed an impressive combat record: 89 missions over Europe, 12 confirmed kills, 2 distinguished flying crosses, and a Purple Heart. But it was what happened after the war that intrigued Dee. The papers showed that Hayes had remained on active duty until 1948, serving at various bases in the South. There were transfer orders, mission reports, and something strange: pay stubs that were much larger than a captain's normal salary. Dee found the answer in a folder marked "Confidential" in faded red ink. Inside were special orders, dated 1947, assigning Captain Hayes to racial reconciliation operations on southern bases. He had been chosen to help integrate military units, serving as a liaison between black pilots and white command. It was dangerous work. The documents contained incident reports, threats, even a police report about an attack on Hayes' barracks at a base in Alabama. The Army was paying him a substantial hazard bonus, which he apparently converted into gold, a common practice among soldiers who didn't trust the banking system to protect the wealth of black men. But it was a folded letter at the bottom of the folder that made Dee understand why Hayes had disappeared. The letter was dated March 15, 1949, written on official War Department letterhead: "Captain Hayes, It is with great regret that we inform you that your assignment to racial reconciliation operations has been terminated, effective immediately. Recent incidents on several southern bases have made your presence complicated for military order. You are to be transferred to Fort Hamilton, New York, for reassessment of assignment. We understand this may be disappointing, but the racial situation in the South requires a more cautious approach at this time. Your service has been exemplary, but political realities require adaptation. Report to Colonel Mitchell at Fort Hamilton no later than March 30th, 1949. Major General William Harrison, War Department. D read the letter 3 times, feeling anger swell in his chest. They were transferring Hayes, not for incompetence or misconduct, but because his excellence as a black pilot was complicating life for white commanders who preferred to maintain the status quo. Hayes had chosen to disappear rather than accept the transfer, and D couldn't blame him. But there was still the question of little Bobby. D scoured all the documents looking for clues about the child's identity. He found sparse references. Bobby got sick yesterday, taught Bobby how to change oil. Bobby asked when I'm going to fly again, but no full name or family information. It was Sarah who gave him the idea. Dad, if Captain Hayes was from Detroit and Bobby was important to him, maybe Bobby was from Detroit too. Or maybe he's the son of someone Hayes knew in the war. D looked at his daughter with admiration. At 16, she was already smarter than many adults he knew. That night, D fired up his old computer and started searching. Robert Hayes, Tuskegee Airman, Detroit, returned several pages, including online military records and history sites. But it was a genealogy website that finally gave him a real lead. A user named Bobby H47 had posted a query in 2018, looking for information about my uncle, Captain Robert Hayes, of the Tuskegee Airmen. He disappeared in 1949 when I was a child. My family never knew what happened to him. Any information would be appreciated. The post included a family photo from 1948, the same photo D had found among Hayes's documents. D looked at the username again. Bobby H47. Bobby Hayes, born in 1947. Little Bobby, now 76 years old. With trembling hands, D created an account on the site and sent a private message to Bobby H47. Mr. Hayes, I believe I found information about your uncle, Captain Robert Hayes. Please contact me as soon as possible. I have items that belong to him, including documents and photographs. My name is Darius Carter and I'm in Meridian, Mississippi. D included his phone number and hit send before he could change his mind. 3 hours later, his phone rang. Hello? This is Bobby Hayes. The voice was that of an old man, but strong and clear. You really have information about Uncle Rebel? Uncle Rebel. Dee's heart leaped. Mr. Hayes, I have much more than information. I have his things. I have the whole story. The phone call with Bobby Hayes lasted 3 hours. Dee learned that Bobby, now Robert Hayes Jr., was a 76-year-old retiree living in Detroit. He had been raised by his older sister after his parents died in a car crash in 1946, when he was just 2 years old. Captain Hayes was his mother's brother and had become a father figure to the boy. Uncle Rebel used to visit whenever he was on leave, Bobby explained, his voice thick with emotion. He taught me how to change a tire, took me to see the planes on Bay. He promised he'd teach me to fly when I grew up. What happened in 1949? Dee asked gently. He just vanished. My sister said he had to go on a secret mission and that he'd be back soon. But weeks passed, then months. We never heard from him again. The Army said he'd been transferred, but they couldn't give details because of national security. Dee closed his eyes, picturing a 2-year-old boy waiting for an uncle who would never return. Mr. Hayes, Bobby, your uncle didn't abandon you. He hid something for you, something that shows how much he loved you. Dee told him about the Harley, about the treasure, about the diary. With every detail, he could hear Bobby quietly crying on the other end of the line. He did that for me, Bobby whispered. All these years I thought maybe he didn't care enough to stay in touch. He cared so much he risked everything to secure your future. They agreed that Bobby would travel to Mississippi the following week. Dee didn't mention the full value of the treasure over the phone, only saying it was substantial and that Bobby was the rightful heir. But after the call, Dee sat in his dark kitchen, watching the gold coins gleam in the light from the refrigerator, and the weight of reality hit him like a punch to the gut. He was about to hand over a fortune to a stranger. $3, $2 million. Enough money to completely transform his life and Sarah's. Enough money to pay for all her medical treatments, send her to the best university in the country, buy a real house, retire before 40. All he had to do was keep his mouth shut. Bobby Hayes had lived 76 years without knowing about the treasure. He could live the rest of his life the same way. Who would get hurt? Dee wouldn't technically be a thief. He'd bought the Harley legally. The treasure was on his property. Dee touched one of the gold coins, feeling its cool weight against his skin. Sarah was asleep in the next room, her breathing light and uneven because of her diabetes. Tomorrow he'd have to take her for another medical checkup that would cost $400 he didn't have. Next week, the insulin pump would need repairs that would cost $200. And here was the solution to all his problems, gleaming golden under his hands. But there was also Captain Hayes's diary, open to the last entry. The gold is for him. The history is for everyone. Dee spent a sleepless night, alternating between rationalizing keeping the treasure and hating himself for even considering it. By morning, he was exhausted and more conflicted than before. At work, Ray noticed his distraction. "Dee, you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Just family stuff, Ray." "Is it Sarah? Is she worse?" Dee shook his head, not trusting his own voice. Ray placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Look, son, I know things are tough. If you need some more overtime or if you want to talk about a loan..." "Thanks, Ray. I'll figure it out." But how? How could he figure it out when the solution was literally in his hands but morally out of his reach? The next few days were torture. Dee obsessively researched Bobby Hayes online, looking for some character flaw that would justify keeping the treasure. But Bobby was exactly what he seemed: a respectable old man, a retiree from the Ford Motor Company, a widower with 3 adult children and 7 grandchildren. Photos on social media showed a man who smiled easily, surrounded by family at barbecues and birthdays. Dee also researched the value of the coins. His conservative estimates had been low. Some of the coins were extremely rare, dated from specific years that made them valuable to collectors. The total value could easily top $4 million. $4 million. Enough money to change not just his life, but the lives of dozens of families in his situation. And when Dee looked at Sarah during dinner, seeing how she ate slowly to make the food last longer, how she hid the pain when her sugar levels were off, how she pretended not to care when other kids did things she couldn't because of her condition, the temptation was almost unbearable. On Thursday night, 2 days before Bobby Hayes was due to arrive, Dee made a decision. He would set aside a portion of the treasure, maybe 100 coins, and hide it for Sarah's medical emergencies. It wasn't technically stealing if he still gave the vast majority to Bobby. It was insurance, protection, what any responsible father would do. Dee locked himself in the garage and began to separate the coins. 100 seemed like a lot. Maybe 50? Or 75? Where did he draw the line between need and greed? His hands were shaking as he counted. 30 coins would be enough to cover Sarah's immediate medical needs. 50 would guarantee a year of peace of mind. 100. Dee stopped abruptly when he heard a noise. Sarah was standing in the garage doorway watching him. "Dad, what are you doing?" He looked at the coins scattered on the workbench, at his own shaking hands, at his daughter's confused and worried face. I'm trying to make a very hard decision, Princess." Sarah came closer, looking at the gold coins with a respectful curiosity. "This is Captain Hayes' stuff, isn't it? The Harley pilot?" Dee nodded, unable to speak. "And you're going to give it all back to his nephew?" I'm supposed to." Sarah studied him with those big, wise eyes that sometimes made him forget she was only 16. "Dad, you always taught me that the right thing isn't always the easy thing. Do you think Captain Hayes would be proud if he knew you kept some of the money he left for little Bobby?" Dee closed his eyes, feeling hot tears behind his eyelids. "No, Princess, I don't think he would be." "Then you already know what to do." Sarah kissed his forehead and went back to the house, leaving him alone with his conscience and a decision that had already been made, even if he didn't want to admit it. On Friday morning, Dee put all 847 coins back into the leather pouch, along with all the documents, photographs, and the diary. When Bobby Hayes arrived on Saturday, he would receive exactly what Captain Robert "Rebel" Hayes had left for him, but that didn't make the decision any less painful. Bobby Hayes arrived in a light blue Buick LeSabre on Saturday morning, driving slowly down D Street as if he were looking for ghosts. Dee watched him from the kitchen window, a tall, thin man with graying hair, moving with the careful dignity of old age. When Bobby got out of the car and looked around, Dee saw in his eyes the same expression he recognized in the mirror every morning, that of someone carrying too much weight for too long. Dee opened the door before Bobby could knock. "Mr. Hayes? You can call me Bobby." The voice was just like it was on the phone, strong but laced with restrained emotion. "You must be Darius." They greeted each other with a handshake that turned, almost unintentionally, into a hug. Two men who had never met before, united by a pilot dead for decades and a story that would finally be told. Dee led Bobby to the garage, where the Harley was mounted on the workbench. Even still incomplete, with parts scattered around, it had a majestic presence. Bobby stopped in the doorway, his breath catching. "My God," he whispered. "It's her. It's really her. You remember it? Like it was yesterday. Uncle Rebel used to sit me on the gas tank when I was little. Said one day he'd teach me to ride." Bobby gently touched the handlebars. She was so beautiful, gleamed like a mirror. Dee watched the old man stroke the motorcycle with the reverence of someone touching a holy relic. In that moment, any lingering doubt about his decision evaporated completely. "Bobby, I have something to show you." Dee brought him inside the house, where he had arranged everything on the kitchen table like a museum exhibit. The gold coins were arranged in perfect rows, the documents laid out chronologically, the photographs displayed like a visual timeline of Captain Hayes's life. Bobby froze in the kitchen doorway. This was all in the Harley's tank, sealed, preserved, waiting. Bobby approached slowly, as if he feared it might all disappear if he moved too fast. He picked up one of the photographs, the one showing Captain Hayes in uniform beside his gleaming Harley. "He was so proud of this motorcycle," Bobby murmured. "He used to say she was his freedom, his way of flying when he couldn't be in the sky." Dee watched Bobby examine each item with reverent care. The gold coins seemed secondary to the photographs and documents. Bobby spent the most time reading the diary entries, his finger tracing the words written in his uncle's hand. "He really did love me," Bobby said, his voice choked with emotion. "All these years I wondered. My sister said he did, but kids need to know, you know. They need to feel it. He risked everything for you, Bobby. He chose to disappear rather than accept a humiliating transfer because he knew it would mean abandoning you, and he made sure you'd never be in need." Bobby looked at the rows of gold coins, but not with greed, with something deeper: relief, validation, the healing of a 74-year-old wound. "How much is all this worth?" "Over $3 million. Maybe 4. Bobby sat down heavily in a chair, the weight of the information clearly hitting him. "4 million. He shook his head slowly. "And you could have kept it all. I never would have known." Dee sat across from him. "I thought about it. I'm not going to lie to you. My daughter has diabetes, we need money for medical treatment, and this fortune would solve all our problems. But your uncle didn't hide this treasure for a broke mechanic in Mississippi. He hid it for little Bobby. And even though I needed the money, you deserved to know the truth about the man who loved you." Bobby wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Darius, can I ask you a question? What do you plan on doing with the Harley?" "Restore it completely. It was my original project before I found the treasure. She deserves to be returned to her former glory." Bobby smiled for the first time since he'd arrived. Uncle Rebel would be proud. He always said that machines have souls, and that treating a machine well was a way of honoring the hands that built it. They spent the rest of the morning organizing the documents and discussing the next steps. Bobby wanted to donate the historical materials to the Tuskegee Airmen Museum, but he insisted that Dee keep the photographs of the Harley for his restoration. It was then that Bobby made a proposal that changed everything. "Darius, I'm 76 years old. My children are successful adults. My grandchildren are all in college or have graduated. I don't need $4 million. Bobby, this is your money. It's your inheritance. No, it's our responsibility." Bobby leaned forward. Uncle Rebel was a hero who was forgotten by history. How many others like him are there? How many veterans, especially black veterans, have died without recognition? Dee saw where the conversation was going and felt something ignite in his chest. "You want to do something bigger. I want to create something Uncle Rebel would approve of. Something that honors not just him, but all the forgotten heroes." In the weeks that followed, Dee and Bobby worked together to develop a plan. They would create the Captain Hayes Memorial Motorcycle Museum in Meridian, dedicated to the Tuskegee Airmen and other African-American veterans whose stories were erased by discrimination and time. The restored Harley would be the centerpiece, but the museum would also tell broader stories of pilots, mechanics, soldiers, and sailors who served with honor, only to return home to a country that treated them like second-class citizens. Bobby would use half the treasure to fund the museum. The other half would be divided. part for Dee and Sarah, recognizing that his honesty had made it all possible, and part for a scholarship fund for young people interested in aviation and mechanics. "I can't accept money for doing the right thing," Dee protested. "It's not a payment," Bobby explained. "It's a partnership. Uncle Rebel left this treasure to take care of people he loved. Now that includes you and Sarah." The restoration of the Harley became a community project. Ray donated space in his shop on the weekends. Local veterans showed up offering to help, sharing their own stories as they sanded paint and polished chrome. Sarah became the project's official photographer, documenting every stage of the transformation. Slowly, Captain Hayes's Harley came back to life. The tank was repaired and repainted a deep blue with silver accents. The engine was completely rebuilt. Every piece of chrome was polished until it gleamed like a mirror. It wasn't just a restoration, it was a resurrection. The museum was set up in a historic building in downtown Meridian that Bobby bought and renovated. The walls were covered with photographs of the Tuskegee Airmen, maps of their missions, and stories of their lives after the war. But the heart of the museum was Captain Hayes's Harley, positioned under spotlights on a revolving platform, with its gas tank open, showing where the treasure had been hidden. A plaque beside the motorcycle told the full story, of Robert Rebel Hayes, of the hidden treasure, and of Darius Carter, the mechanic who chose to honor a hero's memory rather than get rich quietly. The museum's opening drew visitors from all over the state. Elderly veterans came to share their own stories. Families brought children to learn about heroes who never appeared in their school history books. Reporters came to document how a rusted Harley had revealed a hidden treasure of courage and sacrifice. But for Dee, the most important moment came 3 months after the opening. Sarah was giving a tour to a group of high school students, explaining how diabetes didn't stop her from chasing her dreams of becoming an aeronautical engineer. "Captain Hayes proved that people like us can fly," she told the students, gesturing to the gleaming Harley. "And my dad proved that doing the right thing is always worth more than doing the easy thing." Dee watched from a distance, seeing his daughter, now healthy thanks to the medical treatment they could afford, confident thanks to a future that was secure, inspiring other young people. Beside him, Bobby smiled. "Uncle Rebel would be proud," Bobby said quietly. "Of all of us," Dee replied. That night, after the last visitors had left and the museum lights were turned off, Dee was left alone with the Harley. He lightly touched the gleaming tank, remembering the day he'd found it covered in rust and neglect. "Thank you, Captain," he whispered in the dark, "for teaching me that some things are worth more than gold." The motorcycle seemed to shine a little brighter in the emergency light, as if the spirit of Robert Rebel Hayes were finally at peace. 6 months later, Dee got a call that surprised him. It was a documentary producer from New York who had heard about the museum and wanted to make a film about Captain Hayes's story. The documentary, The Hidden Treasure, a Tuskegee Airman Story, aired on the History Channel and brought national attention to the museum. More importantly, it led other families to come forward, relatives of other Tuskegee airmen who had disappeared or whose stories had been lost. The museum expanded, becoming a center for research and preservation for the stories of forgotten African American veterans. Dee left his job at Ray's shop to become the museum's full-time director. Sarah received a full scholarship to study aeronautical engineering at the University of Alabama, inspired by Captain Hayes's story, and determined to continue his legacy in the sky. On a hot summer afternoon, a year after the original discovery, Dee was working on the Harley's maintenance when Bobby showed up, carrying an old leather briefcase. "I found a few more things in my sister's attic," Bobby said, opening the briefcase. Letters Uncle Rebel sent to her before he disappeared. Dee read the letters with growing interest. In one of them, dated a week before Captain Hayes's disappearance, there was a line that made his heart quicken. "Sis, if anything happens to me, tell little Bobby the sky will always be waiting for him, and tell him that sometimes the greatest treasure we can leave behind isn't gold or silver, but the proof that we lived with honor." Dee looked at Bobby, who was wiping his eyes again. "He knew," Bobby whispered. "He knew he was leaving, and yet he cared more about leaving me a lesson than a fortune." "And what lesson was that?" Bobby smiled through his tears. "That a man's true worth isn't in what he accumulates, but in what he leaves behind, in the difference he makes, in the love he shows." Dee looked around the museum, walls covered with the faces of finally recognized heroes, children learning about courage and sacrifice, veterans finding community and purpose. The gleaming Harley at the center of it all, no longer an abandoned vehicle but a symbol that some stories are too important to be forgotten. I think we managed to honor that lesson, Dee said. Uncle Rebel would be proud of all of us, Bobby agreed. Especially you, Darius. You could have taken the gold, but you chose to keep something far more valuable. What was that? The chance to make a difference. That night, Dee drove home under a starry sky, thinking about how his life had changed. Not just financially, though his share of the treasure ensured that he and Sarah would never struggle again. Not just professionally, though running the museum gave him a purpose he never knew he was looking for. The deepest change was spiritual. For the first time since coming back from Afghanistan, Dee felt whole. The nightmares still came occasionally, but now they were balanced by dreams of hope. His hands still shook sometimes, but now it was from emotion, not from trauma. He had found his mission, to preserve the stories of those who were forgotten, to ensure that heroes like Captain Robert Rebel Hayes would never again disappear silently from history. And it all started with a rusted-out Harley that no one else wanted, bought for $50 by a desperate mechanic who still believed in miracles. As Dee parked in front of his house, no longer rented but his own, a place where Sarah could grow up safe, he looked up at the sky and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Thank you, Captain Hayes, for teaching me that sometimes the most valuable thing we can find is the chance to do the right thing. The stars seemed to shine a little brighter, as if a distant pilot were finally flying in peace. 5 years later, Sarah Carter graduated magna cum laude with a degree in aeronautical engineering from the University of Alabama. In her graduation speech, she said, "My father taught me that heroes aren't perfect people. They're people who choose to do the right thing when no one is looking. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we find treasures that teach us that true worth isn't in what we keep, but in what we share." Today, she works for NASA, designing new propulsion systems. On her desk, she keeps a small photo, Captain Robert Rebel Hayes beside his gleaming Harley, smiling for the camera with the pride of a man who knew some things are worth more than gold. The Captain Hayes Memorial Motorcycle Museum has welcomed over 100,000 visitors in its first 5 years. It has become a must-see destination for motorcycle enthusiasts, history students, and families looking for real heroes for their children to admire. And at the entrance to the museum, beneath the gleaming 1948 Harley-Davidson Panhead, a bronze plaque bears the final words from Captain Hayes's diary. The gold is for him. The history is for everyone. Because sometimes the greatest treasures aren't the ones we hide, but the ones we share. And sometimes the most important heroes aren't the ones who fly through the sky, but those who choose to do the right thing when they are alone with their conscience, even when no one would ever know the difference. The story of Captain Robert Rebel Hayes had finally been told. And his lesson, that honor is worth more than gold, that legacy is worth more than wealth, lives on with every visitor who leaves the museum, knowing that true heroes exist, that sacrifice matters, and that sometimes the best discoveries are the ones that transform us from the inside out. If you enjoyed this story of discovery, courage, and moral choice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things. Click the next video to discover another incredible journey of transformation. And share this story if you believe that doing the right thing is always worth more than doing the easy thing.